audit board to be established here in Athens-Clarke County. So now we finally have a monitor that is over that oversight, so hopefully it'll be implemented and up fully running soon. And also, we've been advocating for the auditor office to be restructured, and there's been changes in the auditor office. The good thing is that we have one person that has answers to those questions. What's going on in the auditor's office? Also, what's going on with the PSCOB, Public Safety Civilian Oversight Board. But before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and let Denise give a few updates about AADM and also what's going on in local government. And if you're watching this, we do need people to volunteer to be a part of our Justice Reform Committee because this is ongoing work, continuous work. So thank you all for being here today.
All right, so I'll go ahead and provide some updates on our programs and services. So for bailouts, the year to date, we've bailed 19 people out of jail, and we've provided over $1,600 in legal fees assistance and wraparound services this year. As far as our complaints go, we've taken in 55 complaints against businesses, law enforcement officers, employers, and more. And we've been able to close out 44 of those complaints, whether that meant them just getting the best result ourselves or us referring them to trusted sources in the community or outside of our community. We've had 8 people graduate from our community service program, and currently we have 8 active clients, and it's growing, especially now that the school year is starting back up. A lot of students need their community service hours. And for our End School to Prison Pipeline program, we've now switched to a group mentorship model. So we're able to take in a lot more kids to provide community service opportunities to them and really empower them with the knowledge and the tools that they need to succeed and stay out of that system. So this year we've worked with 12 students through that program. And then on to our community news. So the Athens-Clarke County government completed a disparity study to determine if discrimination in contracting by our government existed and how it can affect the implementation of an affirmative action program when it comes to public contracting. And so the study found that there was a statistical disparity in the use of minority-owned and women-owned enterprises by ACC.gov, and that around 10% of the firms they spoke to reported discriminatory behaviors and barriers to contracting within or with ACC.gov, especially those that are owned by African Americans. It also found that there was a statistical disparity in self-employment earnings for minority-owned and women-owned enterprises in the private sector marketplace. So the recommendations that were provided by the consulting group were to establish a business inclusion office, create a formal strategy for business relations with organizations that promote business with minority-owned and women-owned businesses, in addition to developing a program specifically designed to address the disparities specific to ACC. ACC.gov is also seeking community input on the homelessness strategic plan, and that closes, I believe, tomorrow. I think at 7. Yeah, I think at 5. Mm-hmm. So folks in Athens-Clarke County have the opportunity to provide feedback on the final drafted plan, and you can go to www.accgov.com/ARPA, or if you're here, you can scan the code on our door. That also will take you to a page where it has like a video presentation on what the draft entails. It has the actual draft of it, and then the survey where you're able to provide your feedback. And I believe that the vote on this draft has been scheduled for October 4th, so that first, the Mayor and Commission meeting on the first Tuesday. So it's really important that we get our feedback in by tomorrow so that our voices are heard. And then the last point of business, and I'm sure that Gavin will speak on this further when he gets up here, but 2 of the members of the Public Safety Civilian Oversight Board have sent in their resignations. I'm not sure, I think one of them has been accepted and the other one hasn't yet. Am I right on that? They've both been accepted? Okay, thank you. And for those of you who don't know, the Public Safety Civilian Oversight Board, or PSCOB, is tasked with reviewing complaints of potential police misconduct, as well as making recommendations as to the outcome of those investigations, as well as recommending improvements to the policies and procedures of the public safety departments here in Athens-Clarke County. And AADM was instrumental in the creation of that board, as we believe it's one step further in fostering accountability and transparency here in Athens. So once these positions are opened, AADM will share and promote the application and kind of outline the process for folks to be able to apply, because we need to fill those vacancies as soon as we can. And I believe that's it. All right.
Okay, so next we're gonna have Gavin, if you will come up and just share with everyone. We're gonna do a Q&A after he does his presentation, so we'll be open to where you can ask questions. Should I turn on the microphone? Okay.
I can speak loud if you need
Okay,
me
it's
to.
up to you. I can turn it on.
Oh, I can speak loud.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's gonna come up and talk to us about the auditor's office and also about the Public Civilian Oversight Board. So give it up for Gavin. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you all, and I want to extend a thank you for the invitation to come here tonight to speak with you all and answer any questions you may have. Again, my name is Gavin Hasmer. I'm the recently appointed internal auditor for Athens-Clarke County government as of July 1st, and that was for a 2-year term. As of the beginning of August, another title was essentially added to that, and that was of the PSCOB monitor or liaison. And that was something that, after I'd been appointed auditor, the commission, through a lengthy process even prior to my appointment, had decided to look into whether or not to create a monitor position. And essentially what they decided as a commission was to give that role and responsibilities to the internal auditor. So I accepted that. I'm looking forward to that opportunity, and we've already begun. We've had an opportunity to meet with the PSCOB members and communicate with them. We met in August. Their meeting was canceled in July, and unfortunately, we just found out this afternoon the meeting for tomorrow evening is also canceled. But we do look forward to meeting in October on our regularly scheduled day, and certainly keep us in mind when you look at the calendar for that. As far as a brief background on myself, I've been with Athens-Clarke County for over 17 years. I started out in the planning department, worked there for a long time in numerous roles, which really gave me an opportunity to get to know the community, to have an appreciation for Athens-Clarke County, and not just from a typical development standpoint. I know oftentimes planning is associated with buildings and physical infrastructure and things like that, but it's much more than that if you were to ask any planner. City planning or county planning, land planning in general is about everything that encompasses a community. It's about not only the physical development, it's about the social, the emotional, the cultural aspects of our community, its history, and the demographic makeup of it. And so all of those things came into play during my time in the planning department, and I really came to appreciate everything I learned and continue to learn about this community even almost 2 decades later. After planning, I spent some time in a leadership role with our Central Services Department of Athens-Clarke County. I was the assistant director and the interim director for a period of time. And that, believe it or not, Central Services has an integral role in our community as far as even public safety. I really was able to have communication with our public safety partners, which I think will do us a benefit in this PSCOB role. And that was even through, for example, Central Services. You wouldn't think it, but that's our facilities maintenance, our landscape maintenance, our fleet. You get to know a lot about the government and the community when you start talking about vehicles, especially public safety vehicles, about equipment, their resources, how that affects staffing levels and recruitment. It also opened my eyes to our facilities, for example, the jail, our probation services, our police departments, things of that nature. And so it was a good segue, if you will, for me to apply for and take on this responsibility as internal auditor, and to focus just on the auditor's traditional auditor's office for a second. Historically, Athens-Clarke County has had an auditor's office. It's gone through a couple different changes in name since unification, and it's currently called the Office of Operational Analysis. And the role of it has historically been to act as an independent, objective reviewer of our government's systems, processes, our budgets, how our departments function, and the services that we provide, and if we're doing it in an efficient and effective manner, and to sort of provide that checkpoint. And I report directly to the Mayor and Commission as a charter officer. I'm independent of the county manager's office as well as the county attorney, but certainly I work with them on a daily basis. And my role then is to essentially come up with a work plan annually of departments, programs, and projects that we are going to look at for that year. And we do our analysis both in the field and in our office. We look up best practices around not only Georgia, but even the country if necessary. And we put that all into a report and present it to the Mayor and Commission. The manager's office has an opportunity to also review the report and respond to any recommendations that we as an office make, and we include that as well, so that the Mayor and Commission have a full view of that department or that subject matter and what we saw versus how it was explained to the manager. And hopefully those recommendations are then implemented by the Commission in the future. But as far as our role is to be an observer in the auditor's office and to report on those observations. We are naturally, by the charter, separate from the manager's office, which is in charge of implementing any recommendations from a daily operational standpoint. And then we do it all again annually. So that is essentially the auditor's office. What has now taken place as of August, as I mentioned, is the Public Safety Civilian Oversight Board has been added to the auditor's office, which, quite frankly, I'm excited about, and I'm glad that it ended up there. There was debate initially about where that function would go within our government, whether it would be under the manager's office purview or whether it would be independent in some way. And so I think it is a natural fit for it to be within the internal auditor's office, based on not only what we do with the other half of our time, but what is expected based on the ordinance that was passed for PSCOB. The PSCOB model that essentially was adopted by the Commission is one of a review, I'm going to call it a review/auditor hybrid model, in that we do not have necessarily investigative powers to go and conduct our own separate internal affairs investigation like would be the normal duties of our internal affairs units for each of our public safety partners. But what we do have the capability to do, both as a board and in my position as monitor, is to look over closed cases and see how they were handled, essentially. If there was a complaint made with regard to a specific case, once it has been settled from a legal standpoint, we can take a look at how it was settled. We can then make recommendations as a board to the respective department that was involved, to that chief or to the sheriff or a warden, and ask them to consider our recommendation, whether it be one of disciplinary action, whether it would be one of a policy change going forward. We are also involved in outreach activities, or plan to be, I will say, and training ourselves. And so that's sort of how our role fits into it is, the public safety partners don't necessarily have to agree with our recommendation. They don't have to adopt it if they choose not to. But I'll say that I think it's going to be effective in the fact that it is on the books, that a separate review committee has essentially reviewed the case, made a recommendation, and whether or not the respective head of that agency chooses to follow it, it has been documented. And hopefully that in some way that brings some validity to the process, that it's not just based on an internal investigation, that there's someone is essentially auditing or monitoring those cases and saying in a formal vote, we agree or disagree with the way that this was handled. So that's really it briefly as far as both PSCOB and the auditor's office. I certainly don't want to take up too much time if you all have questions, but I'm willing to go into further detail with anything you do have questions on if you'd like me to. But I'm willing to get started on that.
My first question would be, when initially, because I was part of the task force that made the recommendation of the hybrid model, it is great that to us that it's under the auditor's office, but my concern is the role that one person carries. Initially, we were advocating, and what they said they were going to do was to have a monitor that was hired separately, but works. You would be the overseer, the auditor would be the overseer. Based on AADM is at the point where we scaled back on promoting you can file complaints with us, hoping that this process would come in place. And in the complaints that we receive is a lot, and it's like a 3-person team in order to address those complaints research. So my concern is, how do you see yourself handling both roles efficiently, especially when you open up that process, because complaints from all different angles, whether they're valid or not, people might say this case is closed, but we didn't agree with how it came out. How do you see handling both of those roles, and how do you feel about having to carry that much weight, if you consider it to be weight?
Well, and that's a valid question. Obviously, I knew what I was getting into when I took the position, and so I welcome the challenge and the responsibility of it. It's something I don't take lightly, but I do think, based on, as you described, some of the weight that can come with that, for it to be placed on the department head, which is essentially myself as the auditor and as the monitor, is probably better in the long run, because that responsibility I would hesitate to give to an employee underneath my purview that much weight, when in reality that should fall on my shoulders. Now, what I will say is, the volume of complaints, as you indicated, we are expecting, perhaps a worst case. Hope for the better, though. But there is a staff within this department of myself, 2 management analysts, and an intern to start out with. So those responsibilities and the workload will eventually be divvied up amongst all of us. But the overall responsibility, the final say on certain matters and the decisions that are made, I think it's better that it falls on myself. But there will certainly be additional staff within the office that are tasked with helping to coordinate some of those complaints. Anybody who's looking to file a complaint will have assistance to do so with our staff members. And obviously there are administrative tasks, as I'm sure you're familiar with, in processing some of these complaints. So that will be in place with our office. In fact, I'm in the process of hiring those individuals as we speak. So my hope is to have the office fully staffed within the next couple of weeks. So.
And what role would the board play, PSCOB? Would they continue to play because when we recommend the review model, is that's what they initially are. It's a review board, and in some places they function on their own without having so much like they can actually start taking complaints and review it. But how do you see this process going with the review board that is already there and that's been put in the time? How do you see them playing a role in this process?
Well, I see them playing a big role in it, and I will certainly acknowledge the amount of time and effort that they have put into it, even yourself, for the past year or 2 years. I have been pleasantly surprised coming into this as an administrator to see the level of work that has been done and the effort that has been made. In fact, on tomorrow's agenda, which unfortunately we put off a little bit, I've already been given the complaint form that was developed by PSCOB as a board, and put that into our standard government format, if you will. And that was going to be a discussion topic tomorrow evening to essentially finalize that complaint form, if you will, and have us work to get that posted and active. So the role of PSCOB, I don't think changes with the addition of me as the monitor. The only ordinance changes essentially that took place was to basically name me as the monitor, but as a liaison between PSCOB and our public safety partners. PSCOB still maintains the same responsibilities and roles that it had originally when the ordinance was passed. And as far as the complaint process goes, we've worked together, and again, that's on the agenda, to finalize not only the complaint form, but the complaint process based on the ordinance. And so what we did is we put together essentially a diagram that, again, will eventually be posted as well, that indicates how a complaint is received, processed, and finalized throughout that process. And PSCOB is a part of that, not only by ordinance, because it's the right thing to do with the model that we have developed as a community. So complaints, our hope anyway, is that complaints do come to our office. It's not to say that they can't be received by a PSCOB member. We don't certainly want to turn anyone down for any reason, but they may be redirected to submit it to our office. And there's a couple of reasons for that, is to make sure that we are involved in that process. If something were to happen, for example, where a complaint was received solely by a single member of PSCOB, we don't know that it was received, and perhaps maybe the other board members don't know it was received for 4 weeks until they meet again. Well, the clock starts ticking technically by ordinance when we receive a complaint. So it's one, to acknowledge that a complaint was received. It was to make sure that we are following the process that was put forward, that we are acknowledging the complaint not only with the complainant, but also with our public safety partners who are perhaps the recipient of the alleged complaint. And PSCOB as well is notified as well. And then as that process begins to unfold and PSCOB decides as a board that this is a valid complaint, that they are worth looking into, we'll do our part from an administrative side to gather any information that they may ask us to gather. We'll report back to them as a board so that they have all the facts that they need to feel as though they can make a recommendation or a decision. And essentially, it is their decision. As a board, my role is not one to determine whether a complaint, is not only valid but also it warrants some additional discipline than what was taken. That is not necessarily my role. That is a determination by the board based on the facts that we present to them. My role is to remain neutral in the process, to be objective, and to work between both sides to not only receive information from our public safety partners, process it for PSCOB, and then also deliver some of those recommendations to our partners and say, here's what the decision was and how are we going to go about this. So PSCOB will be a big part of the complaint process.
I have a question. It kind of goes back to Mocha's original question about this kind of like staffing levels.
Sure.
So like this is an office that's been totally vacant for over a year, right? And I guess I'm just imagining that there's a lot of work to be done in this, like just as like a resident or a taxpayer or whatever. I guess I want you to get busy on all these audits that are probably are piled up, So do you think you have, so given all that work that's to be done in your normal capacity, do you think you have the staffing to really take this role as monitor of PSCOB, seriously?
Well, certainly, we're going to take it seriously in whatever capacity we're able to function at. My hope and goal, obviously, is to meet the challenge and make sure that we're giving just as much attention as PSCOB warrants as we are to the regular audit process. And my job is to balance that between the two. And certainly when we bring on staff, I think that'll certainly help out a lot. You're right. Right now, for the last 3 months, essentially, it's been me. This isn't a scenario where I've walked in and, there's an existing employee that can help direct me, this is where these are, this is what this is, and this is how we've done it. No, it's essentially been me. But I've put in the hours, and I look forward to the success that we can bring, and I'm excited about the fact that, we're able to take this in a brand new direction, if you will. So I'm not going to lie. Is it going to be a challenge? Absolutely. I've been in government long enough, in this government long enough, to realize all of the administrative tasks and management tasks that go along with just the daily duties of the job. There's answering phones, there's dealing with customers, emails, payroll, all those things that happen in a regular office in addition to the duties that everyone expects. But I'll say this, upon recommendation and subsequent voting on authorizing me to have those roles and responsibilities associated with PSCOB, I think the commission made it very clear that if at any point, but certainly after a reasonable period where I'm able to gauge how things are going, I may go back to them and say, listen, here's how it's gone so far. This is what's working, this isn't what's working, and this is how we can potentially solve this. And that whether that's from a budgetary standpoint, whether that's from a staffing standpoint, that's a conversation that I will certainly have with them, and I think there will welcome an opening to that once we've sort of taken off a little bit and gotten things moving. But we just haven't been in that position yet. We've been working hard for it to get not only the audit side going, but also the PSCOB side with the complaints and any surveys from the community that they're looking to do. But once we can actually measure that, I'll have to report back from a budgetary or staffing standpoint. So.
I'm going to come to you next, Steve, and then. Oh, okay. Well, Steve, and then you.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, thanks, Mom.
Okay. Have you come up with a work plan yet for your auditor role?
I have. So it hasn't been released yet. It's still in its draft form, but essentially the audit committee is looking to meet, I believe, in 2 weeks to finalize, hopefully, that draft. And essentially it will be brought before the mayor and commission then for their approval. So my hope is that it could be finalized as early as November, as late as December. But yes, we have been working on that. I have been working on that over the last few months to get that background information, come up with a list of eligible topics, as well as any scope or objectives for those. And I presented it initially to the audit committee, and they've essentially been looking at it over the last couple of weeks until their next meeting. So yes, we are working on that.
Can you disclose any of it? What you're looking at?
No, I think it'd be unfair to
areas?
disclose it when they haven't seen the final iteration of it themselves and been able to discuss it, because quite honestly, it could change, when it is presented to them. But our goal, with regard to audits is perhaps a new approach to the way that things have historically been done. And that's not to say that they were done incorrectly. But looking forward and now trying to balance audits with PSCOB, which is a new function of this office. My goal is to have audits run with the fiscal year. It's not to say we're going to just cut something short. If June 30th comes up and we're not done, we're just going to stop it. We'll take the time to make sure that we do a thorough analysis. But nonetheless, the work plan is going to be dictated by the fiscal year, in my opinion. And with that, we're going to try to break it into two different types of audits, if you will. And one may be the more comprehensive audits of the past, where we really focus on a particular department or program and dig into it for really clear objectives and purpose. And those can tend to take 6 months. On the other hand, there are other audits that I think we can do with a quicker turnaround, at least I'm hopeful, that are more of your touch base type of audits with some of our departments. In looking at the historical list of audits that have been completed since essentially unification, there are departments that have yet to ever be audited within our government. And so I acknowledge that. We're not going to get it done overnight, obviously, but I do think it's important that even if it's not a comprehensive, detailed audit of a certain function, something that touches base with all of our departments on a regular basis, to where we can possibly say every 5 years, every department will have been audited in some capacity, considering there's 40-some different departments, offices, and courts. Our goal is to at least go in and say, well, here's an internal control audit. Are we at least acknowledging the mission, the objectives that we put out as a department, the services that this department is expected to provide? Have we checked up on that? Even if it's to say and check a box that says yes or no and make it as simple as that, it's something that we can look at within a month's period or 2 months period. I think that's important. We can look at the budget, hit a quick 5-year history of the budget and whether or not we're on the right track or not. We can look at some of those internal controls within the department. Who's in charge of cash, who's in charge of receipts, who's in charge of payroll, things like that. Those are all things that we just want to make sure that someone is obviously paying attention and not going a period of 30 years before we check up on that. So I think there's going to be a different approach ultimately to the audits.
Thank you. So I'm interested in, this builds on some of the prior questions for sure. As you talk about the balance between the two roles and the workload coming from the two sources, the auditor responsibility and PSCOB. My question has to do with what you expect about kind of what that balance will look like, right? I know you want to get the right balance, and I appreciate what you said about that. Have you had any indications from the mayor or commissioner, the audit committee, that side of the scale has to have a chunk of this size, or that a percent should go here or there? Can you comment on your expectations if you haven't had any direction?
Sure. There hasn't been any direction other than to, here's the responsibility and do your best to accomplish it. And, I'll say this, it is something that I'm paying attention to the point where I am documenting essentially the number of phone calls that are related with one thing versus the other, the number of meetings I have, the number of discussions and emails and things like that. And that's not only to provide me with clarity on how to balance things, but also to report eventually back to the Merit Commission and say with truth and honesty, okay, this is the way it's coming out. What I will say is it's going to be, I think, a period of peaks and flows based on, if we are conducting audits on a fiscal year basis, well, that means that at the end of the fiscal year, there's going to be a lot of attention paid to that, and at the beginning of the fiscal year, there's going to be a lot of attention. And perhaps in between, as we're working on those audits, it can maybe moderate out a little bit. But at the same time, PSCOB just doesn't function necessarily on we'll fill in between those times. Complaints could be received at any point in time where incidents occur. But I will say that PSCOB, for example, is based somewhat on calendar year in terms of their reporting. And so one of the things that they're looking to work on right now and hopefully finalize, I believe, by the end of the calendar year is their annual report to the Merit Commission. So that helps out a little bit. My goal is to make sure that both boards meet monthly. They meet separate weeks, but at least we know that outlook going forward is that, okay, essentially Each board's going to meet once a month. We can prepare for that accordingly. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into preparing agendas and documenting minutes and getting things ready to go for just a simple meeting. But we'll be able to handle that part of it. I think that I've established a good enough relationship thus far, and I obviously hope to continue that with both boards in the expectation that they both understand that there is another board competing with them for time. Both the audit committee understands that, and they've in fact asked for updates on PSCOB just from a staffing level and from a workload level to make sure that they're not overburdening the system when it comes to audits. And I think the same with PSCOB. They were made aware that the audit committee, has a say in the other side of what I do. And so that balance is going to be delicate. I'm not going to say that I have the answer yet. As soon as we get the complaint process ready to go, as soon as we get the community survey up, I could throw up my arms and be like, okay, we're going to have to rethink this based on whatever comes in. But for my part, I'm going to be honest about it with both committees, including the mayor and commission, and let them know this is the reality of having these two functions within one office. And I think, again, that they're open and receptive to hearing about that. One thing I've already noticed just in the 2 months, obviously, is from a budgetary standpoint, there is no budget for PSCOB. There hasn't been, and there still isn't. That's one of my main objectives going forward now as we prepare in the next couple of months for next year's budget, is to make sure that there is some funding put for that specific purpose. It's one thing to come up with an ordinance that requires training and outreach and administrative tasks, but then also not have a budget to accommodate those things. And I don't think that was done necessarily purposely. I think they were essentially waiting for the staff and the department to be able to assign that budget to. But now that we've gotten to that point, there's certainly a need for that. The work plan itself for the audit committee has been drafted with the knowledge that PSCOB is an essential function of what we do. And so as much as I would like to say, we're going to go and complete a dozen audits in the next 6 months, it's just not going to happen. And that wouldn't be fair to the role that I play as monitor and a liaison to those boards. Because one thing that I've just learned in the short amount of time so far, and one thing that is important to me, and I think a key to success, is that communication aspect when it comes to PSCOB. Not only between myself and the board, or myself and those public safety agencies, but between the two. And essentially, I act as that middle person, and it's trying to balance that participation from our public safety agencies with some of the requests of PSCOB that they obviously want to complete things. They want to be effective, and they want to be progressive in what their role is, and communicating that with our public safety partners, and making sure that they understand where PSCOB is coming from, and that PSCOB understands where they're coming from with certain things, and trying to balance that in between. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. Okay.
Given all of the questions about capacity and everything, I'm curious, and you mentioned that the process is sort of still being defined and honed at this point, but how might you prioritize if you get, say, 100 complaints, you have a certain level of capacity to respond to some of them? What are some of the conversations that you've had around strategies to prioritize complaints as they come in, whether it's first come first serve, or are there some that rise to a certain level, and are there other points of influence, like if the commission were to say, I want you to look into this, or if a PSCOB member says, we really want you to look into this one, or maybe you have your own discretion about all this. I'm just curious, what are some conversations or thoughts that you have on that at this point?
Those are very good questions. And I have thought about some of them in some capacity, but we won't know the full weight or influx of any complaints until we obviously get it posted and get it ready to go. I don't think there's necessarily a prioritization of the complaints as much as there is an emphasis on our part to make sure that we're receiving those complaints in a completed format. And that's something that we'll strive to obviously work with our citizens with, but at the same time there is a level of responsibility to make sure that this is the information we're requesting to your best ability, are you able to provide it? And once we've deemed essentially a complaint as complete, it's not necessarily, again, the office's role to determine, okay, there's validity to this or not. What I've asked and will likely continue to ask the PSCOB board members to consider is, per the ordinance, when a complaint is received, essentially they have 10 days as a board to say that they're either going to justify this complaint and look into it further, or they don't feel it's justified and essentially it's not going to be looked into any further. That time frame exists regardless if we get 2 that week or if we get 25 that week. Now it's going to be my role to try and balance that out the best I can, and it may be all hands on deck from a staffing standpoint that, as much as we may have an audit to work on that week, perhaps that gets pushed off a week and we have to adjust our schedule. But one thing that we've come to notice as we've started to put things into play is ordinances aren't perfect. They're great to get us established and get us going, and so I'm thankful for that. But there's a couple instances where, as we're going through them now in a practical sense, we're looking at it like, that's not going to work. And so, for example, with PSCOB only meeting once a month, well, for them to justify or not justify a complaint in 10 days isn't going to work.
Like, that is
Yeah, so
I was like, I don't want to rain on y'all
No,
parade, but
no.
it ain't gonna work.
So what I'm essentially going to ask them, and I think they're amenable to this, but again, we haven't gotten into a greater discussion about it. That's, again, on the agenda for next time, is to grant our office that authority just in terms of validating that a complaint form is complete and taking the directive that essentially all complaints received from the office will be considered valid from an administrative standpoint and worth looking into. It's not to say that as we look into them past the 10 days that PSCOB as a board can't go 60 days later and say, well, this is the facts we've got, this isn't working, no, we don't feel this is justified. They still have that right to do that. But I think from an administrative side, it at least grants us as an office as the authority to say, okay, every complaint we received per PSCOB is going to be deemed valid upon acceptance to get us to that 10-day acknowledgement period. And then as we meet the next time, 30 days later, we'll let them know, okay, here's what we've received this month. And all of these have been deemed as acceptable to meet the 10-day period. But you as a board now have them in front of you. And do you feel that, let's just throw a number of these 20, all of them are worth moving forward with and us looking into information? Or now upon more in-depth look, maybe only half of them are. And so what we would then do is take that directive from PSCOB as a board when they meet as an official action and say, okay, we'll notify them, we're not moving forward with these, we are moving forward with these. But I do think that's a way to at least acknowledge the 10-day period and meet it by saying that if you submit something, we're going to give it the proper attention, and we're not just going to make a hasty decision within 10 days, and especially one that doesn't have the full force of the entire board since they haven't had the opportunity to meet. We're going to acknowledge administratively that it's justified for now, and we're going to move it forward. But again, that still needs to be decided upon by PSCOB.
I don't see need to belabor this.
Okay, so
is there gonna be a mechanism outside of the meetings to where, because okay, even in this scenario where they meet, they have 10 days, they meet once a month,
Correct.
right? So even if they meet that once a month and you are presented with 20 things in front of you at that's gonna be a long meeting, right?
Sure. It is.
So is there a mechanism in between to where they're able to, okay, you went through, you got all the information to where they can look at this before they meet? I'm just
Yeah.
trying to, I wish I could give y'all so many advice, you know, but I know it probably gonna take from AADM, but I wish I could give y'all, because we have went through it with the practical, say this gonna work, oh, no.
Yeah.
And understanding that once you open that gate, you're going to get complaints. And then how are you going to decide whether or not someone's complaint is valid? Because then we have to do research. And for every person, it takes time to do that research. And sometimes we become very overwhelmed.
Sure.
So, and this is a 3-person team that is on these things. And so I'm just wondering, like, okay, how is this going to work when the floodgates open? Like between PSCOB and you guys, and without stuff falling through the cracks and y'all feeling overwhelmed. So that's, and I know you don't have all the answers and stuff, but trust me when I say this. No matter how, no matter how organized you are, trying to do those audits, and people, like, she comes in here and that phone is blowing up from the time before she comes in the office, and for you to, and she has to decipher, is this valid, and it's a constant conversation on validity, then it's the research, then so it's really a process that takes longer than like what you might be expecting.
Sure.
And how are they gonna make this decision when you come and say, well, we got 20 complaints?
No, and I certainly, appreciate, the fact that you all have been going through this for a while. So, I don't take that lightly, and obviously I'm grateful for the advice that you all are able to give. I think from our standpoint, again, it's not to say that what I envision essentially in the 10 days, and again, I'm speaking not for the board at this point because they haven't decided this yet, is us making sure that the form that is required to be filled out, that the required information is there, that it's been notarized because that is a requirement. That is something that we, I think, can handle as a team during that 10-day period. It is not going to be to look into each individual case, at that point anyway. It is not going to be determining, okay, well, this is your complaint and it's kind of right on the border of whether we can actually look into that or not. I think essentially that 10-day period is, you filled out the form, it was notarized, you're going to pass that along. Now, to your point, after the 10-day period, there are some other periods, after a decision is made, any sort of appeal that also have timeframes on it. But the board itself isn't necessarily held to a time frame once the 10 days is over. If they decide as a board, okay, we received 20 complaints for this month, our meeting's only going to be 2 hours and we're only going to be looking at these 10. It's not to say we're going to dismiss those other 10, we'll just look at them at the next meeting or in between. I think there are going to be mechanisms for us to get that information out ahead of a meeting so that they aren't just sort of burdened within a 2-hour period of, okay, here's what we got, this is the first time you're seeing it. We try to send that information out ahead of time. And, we may have to move that calendar up a little bit to 2 weeks before every meeting. But that's what we're going to look into. If they decide then as a board, okay, we're going to move forward with a certain percentage or certain cases, we'll do our best with the time that we have and the workload that we have to get them that information. But that's something that I plan to be upfront with them about, is if you are assigning 10 of these 20 right now and say all of these appear to be valid, go ahead and research all 10 of these, more than likely I'm going to be able to tell them, hey, you may not get all that by the next meeting. It may be the second meeting thereafter. So I'll try to be as clear as possible and realistic. But again, until we get there, unfortunately, and anticipating. As I said, it's sort of a worst case scenario. We'll have to learn from that what works and what doesn't work with regard to our office and some of the procedures that are established in the ordinance. So
It's 6:53, so we're gonna take one final question if anyone has.
Have you, are you aware of NACAL? Have you heard
Yes,
that word? So, okay, so it seems to me that as you're setting this up, and I can see, I mean, this is definitely a work in progress.
Yes.
And it's gonna be a work in progress for months.
yes,
Maybe for the next year, it's gonna be a work in progress. So have you been given the authority to go ahead and contact folks in other cities or NACAL for advice as to how to maybe structure things, do things? It seems to me one of the things that I think that the monitor position was seen as helping with the board, it doesn't have any expertise, in actually running this kind of program. We all just came off the streets like the rest of everybody else. And so they're looking to the monitor for the day-to-day type of thing and say, hey, if we're going to set something up, can you contact so-and-so or try and get some information from, there's a fella in Atlanta, whose name?
Lee.
Yeah, he's been there for 10 or 12 years and seen the progression of that agency. And he came here and spoke, I know, to the PSCOB a while ago,
yes.
a few months ago. I was there. He's very knowledgeable and very, seemed to be very friendly and very open
Yes.
to requests for, you have any advice here or what could we do? How might we do this better? So rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, I hope you have the authority to go and reach out to those folks. Do you feel
Yes,
that support from the mayor and commission, I guess?
I do. I wouldn't hesitate to reach out, and obviously I've done some of my homework right now, comparing against some of the other cities that have different types of positions or similar type roles. Whether that be Atlanta, whether that be Columbus, Georgia, Knoxville, Tennessee, Boulder, Madison, Wisconsin. They all have different forms of some sort of monitor or PSCOB function. So yes, I have that authority and that responsibility, obviously, in my role to make sure that we're putting forth the best practices that we can, to reach out to some of our similar communities or those that have programs like this and gain advice. Now, what I can also do, though, is from an administrative standpoint, take those ideas and those thoughts to PSCOB and basically say, okay, here are some of these best practices that we've been able to research and are worth considering in what we do. But, as part of the regular democratic checks and balances, some of what I gather and the information that I do isn't always, of the same idea perhaps as board members. So, it's not to say that everything I gain from knowledge of other entities is going to be put in practice, because they may have other thoughts. But that's the good check and balance that we have. And same when it comes to ordinances. I certainly have the ability, and so does PSCOB, to bring forward ordinance changes to what we have on the books right now. But at the end of the day, those have to be voted on as well. And so I have yet, though, to hear, any lack of support from our commission or even from PSCOB. For example, right now, there is an ordinance amendment even before them at their next voting meeting with relation to PSCOB, and that was just one of those technical things, again, that we found in our ordinance when it comes to vacancies on the board. So, I've already proposed and made PSCOB aware of the fact that I'm proposing that change, and I fully anticipate there will be plenty of those going forward. But no, I wouldn't hesitate in my role, and honestly, I think that's an expectation that as the monitor or liaison, I am to put forth different ideas and different methods and different research, and make the board aware of different things. But they also have a responsibility as well, and they're aware of the fact that they need to undergo continuous training, that they have outreach events, and we're working on that as well. So.
All right, the final question I have
Yes.
is how can someone apply for there's two vacancies?
Yes.
And I know in the past when we initially made a recommendation, the mayor and commission put it out there to the community and that people were able to apply, then they went through the process and they picked. Are they using the same process? And if so, when can people apply? Because we would love to share it and let
Sure.
people know about it.
Well, I can certainly let you know when that process will, sort of hit the webpage. But yes, that was part of the ordinance amendment that's before the commission right now. Is unfortunately the way it was worded in the ordinance, unlike actually any of our other boards as a government, because of the practical reasons behind it. It stated that any vacancies that occur for the time of the vacancy, there's 60-day time clock to replace that individual. Because this is a board and authority or commission, it follows our typical procedure, like you said, for advertisement by the clerk of commission's office. Interviews are set up by the commission, and then the commission as a whole has to vote on those individuals at their regular public meetings. Well, the mayor and commission public meetings themselves are going to take 60 days from a processing standpoint, so it wasn't realistic to be able to have someone apply, be interviewed, vetted, and then voted on within 60 days when the mayor and commission itself would take 60 days. So that's something that we're essentially proposing that it follow the normal process for any of our boards, which are advertised by the clerk of commission to the community as a whole. That applications can be made. The mayor and commission will interview individuals for that and then make their selection by a vote. But yes, although I don't have the exact date of when that advertisement will go out, I can certainly look into that and get that for you. So, yeah.
Thank you. Will y'all give it up for Gavin? Okay, so AADM next meeting will be by Zoom on the second Saturday of each month, 10:30 a.m. to 12. Join us on Zoom. It's really fun. You don't have to leave your house so you can attend in your pajamas. We do need some volunteers to be a part of the Justice Reform Committee. We have a lot of work to be done. The latest news is check out the website. We published one article. Her name is Heather Clarke. She's a local business owner at, what's the name of the bakery?
Cecilia's Cake Shop.
And she felt like she was harassed by the police. And so she's asking for community support. And so we went through the process, and that's what we usually do. She filed a complaint, came back. We told her to reach out to PSCOB, but the complaint process wasn't in place yet. Told her to reach out to the attorney office. It expired. So AADM does what AADM does. We're going to help to amplify her voice, and hopefully she'll get some justice. And I'm asking for your guys' support. Her name is Heather Clarke. Go on our website, click on news, and you'll see that article. And we have a couple of other complaints that we're going to release article-based so people we start to share their stories, because sometimes discrimination is hard to prove. They're not really getting justice as far as answers, and their stories go unignored. And we notice that a lot of these people just want answers. They want people to sit down and explain, why did this happen to me, And so that's what we're trying to do for Heather Clarke. So thank y'all for being here. I appreciate it. And hopefully y'all will join us on the second Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you.